Welcome back to my YouTube channel and podcast, Wonders and Miracles, where we get to celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, and I'm so happy to have you join me today as we talk with Becca Hammond from Idaho. In May of 2020, while Becca was pregnant with her 8th baby, she suffered a series of strokes. So today, she's going to take us on her journey and share the many miracles that took place during this time in her life. But before we jump into this episode, if you love miracle stories and want to hear more, hit the like and subscribe button so you can catch all the inspiring and uplifting episodes of real people sharing real miracles. So Becca, thanks for being here, and go ahead and share with us your story. I'm excited to hear all the details.
Thank you. So I'm going to have to tell you a little bit more about my history to get the full aspect of my story. So my husband and I celebrated our 19th anniversary last week. Prior to being married, everyone talks about how many kids they want. Well, I said 4, maybe 6. Our first baby was born just over a year after we were married. And then our second one came 2 years later. And then the third 2 years later. Then our fourth 2 years later. And when our fourth was born, it was kind of a traumatic birth. My husband held her for the first time and looked at me and said, "There's more. I just know there's more." Not the best time to tell a wife that there's more kids, but I also knew there was more kids to come. Well, shortly after I had her, I was doing some guided meditation, and I have no idea what they were talking about in the meditation, but I had a vision as clear as day. I knew all my family was around me, and there were 2 little boys in front of me, and they looked about like the same age. They were handing me a baby girl. There was 3 more kids there, and so I thought, 7 kids. Well, 3 years later, I got pregnant. I was like dead set that it was a little boy. When she was delivered and they told me it was a girl, I asked them if they were correct. I was like, "Are you sure?" When she was 10 months old, that baby, I found out I was pregnant. I thought, well, okay, well, those little boys they've got to come. It was a girl. And at that point, I was devastated. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I want to be done. My husband gave me a blessing. In that blessing, he told me that I had promised to be a mother of many in heaven. So gave me the strength to be like, okay. A couple years later, we had a baby boy. So that was number 7. When he was a year old, I had a miscarriage. We don't know the sex of it. But at that point, I was tired. I just felt like I wasn't healthy enough to have another baby. I kept praying, asking if I could be done having kids. And the answer was always, the Lord will provide if I have another baby, but not to do anything permanently so I can't have kids. So 2020 hit. Well, December of 19, we had a friend that was really sick, and she had been to the emergency room a couple times. The only thing that they could find when they went in is she had coronavirus. This was before the pandemic and all the testing. So my husband and I went over and he helped her. He's a chiropractor, acupuncturist, naturopath. That was the middle of December. And at the very end of December, my husband got a fever. He never gets sick. He had a fever for 3 hours and he slept. I, on the other hand, the next week got sick and I was in bed for a week. Fever, chills. It was so bad that my older daughter stayed home from school to be with the little ones because I wasn't getting out of bed. Well, when I was sick, I had a severe neck ache. My whole shoulders and everything locked up, and I just never got better. Even after I started feeling better, my neck was in constant pain. The pandemic hit in March. I had 5 kids come home from school trying to do homeschool. My husband's office was being closed down. So I had my husband home, no income coming in, my kids all home from school, doing homeschool, and I found out I was pregnant. I was
And that's a lot.
stressed.
Yes, that's a lot.
I was a little stressed out of my mind. So in May, the 1st of May, my husband decided he was going to go back to the office. So he went Monday, May 4th, and I stayed home. I mowed the lawn and I had the kids help me weed all the flower beds. And I had morning sickness setting in. And every time I would throw up, I just would get so weak that I couldn't get out of bed. So I was feeling really good on Monday. I even worked out. So on Tuesday, I was exhausted from that already, but then I just was throwing up profusely and had the hardest time getting out of bed. Well, my husband came home, and by that evening, I was having really weird symptoms. The room kind of was spinning. I felt almost like I was going to pass out. He asked me if I wanted him to take me into the hospital, and I said, no, I'll be fine. By probably 6 that morning, I was to the point where I was unable to get out of bed at all. My husband helped me to the car. I had called my doctor's office. We were going to meet them at 8 o'clock in the morning. But by the time I got there, they had someone waiting outside the door, and they said, because of COVID, we want you to go to the emergency room. So I went to the emergency room. They did my labs. They were like, your labs look great. There's one slightly elevated. They did ultrasounds of the baby and everything looked fine. And they said, you probably just have an infection. We're going to give you antibiotics and send you home. I had been throwing up profusely while I was there. At one time, I fell asleep and woke up and the room was upside down. At one time, my face started going numb on the left side. They kind of just looked at me like I was crazy. So when they told me I was going home, I said, no, you're going to send me upstairs to a room. They found me a room and sent me upstairs. I sat in the room. They just questioned what was going on. By the third doctor, they finally listened to what we were saying in the first hand. Both my husband and I felt like I just need to have a CAT scan to see what's going on. So they did the CAT scan and found I had low blood flow going to the brainstem. So they decided they wanted to confirm it with an MRI, but because of the little hospital, they had to bring in someone. I went into the MRI at 10 o'clock that night. By the time I got done, Lifeline was there, and they strapped me onto another thing and brought my husband over and said, you can say goodbye. There's no room for him, but we're going to send you to the University of Utah. It's a drive. It's about 3.5 hours. And to fly, it took them 45 minutes in the Lifeline.
At this point, did they tell you anything that they had found, or like, what were you feeling when they said, we're just going to life flight you?
So they told me that they were going to send me into surgery at the University of Utah. They didn't give me any other details. My husband later told me that they made him sign papers saying that there was a possibility that I could have a stroke. I was unaware of that. My husband got in the car and was driving. When I got there through the Lifeline, I went straight into the ER where they intubated me and took me right into surgery. I've never had surgery before. The thing that I found was I don't go under anesthesia. I physically cannot move or open my eyes, but I'm fully aware of what's going on and I can feel everything. So luckily this surgery, they went through the artery of my arm and went up to the vertebral arteries had been torn bilaterally, both of them. And they were removing the blood clots that had formed. While they were doing that, I was aware of what they were doing. I could feel it. And then all of a sudden, I was out. And I came in and out for a while. I remember waking up a little in the recovery, and they told me to move my left side, and I moved it. And they told me to move my right side, and I couldn't, but I could feel that they were pinching me over and over. And so they immediately took me in to get another MRI to find that I had had a stroke on the left side of my brainstem, causing my entire right side to have no mobility. The next time I remember, I was sitting in my room in the ICU. Finally, I could move my eyes, open my eyes, and to find that I had blurred double vision and slurred speech. Then they put in an NG tube because I was unable to swallow. While I was going through this process, my husband arrived, and they had security at the door to escort him out, telling me because of COVID, he had to turn around and go home. And it was on his way home that they called and told him I had a stroke. So he went home, and I had the nurses trying to explain to me that I had just had a stroke. I was a little overwhelmed, but I hoped that I was going to come back. Everything was going to be okay. Even that day, they had me up at the bedside. I was doing partial squats with the PT. I was feeling very, very positive that it was going to be okay. I had family calling me. The only communication with family was through FaceTime. I stayed there in the ICU. They were doing a full heparin drip. I had the feeding tube. I just had wires everywhere. I was having a lot of difficulty sleeping. 2 days after I had the first stroke, I was talking to the nurse. I started to tell her my left side is feeling numb. And as I started to tell her that, my speech was completely gone. Difficulty breathing. She ran, got all of the nurses. The intern, the intern, she was holding up my jaw just so that I could breathe. And the last thing that I remember is the doctor yelling at the nurse saying, "Is CAT scan ready?" And she said, "It will be ready in 10 minutes. And he said, "She'll be dead in 10 minutes. And then I was out. During that point, it's 4 a.m, they called to wake my husband up and get permission to take me back into surgery. And they asked permission to close off my left vertebra artery. And he asked if there was any other options. And they said, "No, give us permission to do this or she will die." So he gave permission and they hung up. It wasn't until 1 or 2 in the afternoon that they called back to tell him that I was alive. I tried to ask my family what it was like on their side of the story. My husband said that he gathered the kids for prayer and they prayed that I would be okay. But if it wasn't his will, they prayed they would be okay. So when I woke up from that surgery and looked around and I still had blurred vision and double vision, I would have to hold one hand, the one hand that did move, over one eye so I could see straight. I looked and I saw the nurse, and the first thing I said was, "I don't want to be here." And she goes, "Oh, honey, I know. Lots of people don't want to be here at the hospital." And I said, "No, I don't want to be on Earth. I don't want to be here." And so, of course, they took it as that I was suicidal. So they brought in social work and different things. my neurologist came in and saw me and asked me if I felt like if they could get permission that my husband could come down, if that would be what I needed. Of course, I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity to have him with me. They called and told him that he'd come down. So he came straight down. He just gathered and stuff and left. Thankfully, because of COVID and all my kids were home, the older ones just took care of the little ones. I have a niece that's at BYU in Idaho. She came and helped stay with my kids. So he came down to me. I had a lot of mixed feelings. I was so happy to see him, but at the same time, I didn't want him to see me that way. He was able to stay with me for a couple days, but during that time, he would get yelled at if he left the room to go get food, to use the bathroom. To use the ICU bathroom in my room that was open to everything. There was one CNA that snuck him in to get a shower. I was on a feeding tube, so no food was coming into my room, but he was there with special permission, I guess, that he could be there. So they transferred me from the ICU to like a step down from the ICU. And I was there for approximately a day. And then they were going to move me to a rehab center. So he had been there for maybe 2 days. And they told him that he could not be with me in the rehab center. So he had to go home. By that time, I was feeling high hope, and I was determined that I was going to go to rehab, and I was going to do everything that they asked of me, and I was going to get better. Day 1 and day 2 went really well, except for nights. At night, my neck would hurt extremely bad, and I would get spasms through my whole body. I was asking for something to help me with the pain, and because I was pregnant, there was only so much they could give me, and the nurses were getting irritated by me. And by day 3, I remember going to PT, and I told the physical therapist, I said, I'll do anything you ask me to do, but I just want you to know that I'm extremely weak. So I was doing the exercises that he would ask, and he said, I think we need to be done for the day, because he could see my weakness. He checked my blood pressure. Of course, the entire time, my blood pressure was below 100. So he was like, oh, your blood pressure's fine, you're fine. By the time I got back up to my room after PT, I remember calling my husband, and at that time the doctor was coming in to see me. I put him on speaker and I was like, they're here to kill me. I was delusional. I was like so confused. I was so weak and everything. I was throwing up. I just felt miserable. They got another IV in me and got me some medication. They were like, you should be fine. And at that point, I told them that I would no longer take the antidepressant they put me on. I said, I won't take it. And they were like, you have to take it for a month before you start feeling the effects. And I said, I'm not going to take it for a month if it makes me feel crappy. That night was by far the worst. The spasms were 15 spasms per minute. I called my husband and I just told him, I can't do this anymore. I was losing hope. So he had mentioned that on his way home, he had been praying what he needed to do to help me. And he said, my mission buddy's name kept coming to mind. Now, my husband served a mission in Toulouse, France, 19 years earlier, before we got married. So John Hatch just kept coming to mind. Well, he knew John Hatch was a chiropractor. He called Dr. Hatch, and Dr. Hatch said, you know that I specialized in neurology, and my whole practice is brain rehab. When she's stable, bring her to me. No, Dr. Hatch has a 3 to 6 month waiting list. That night I said, in the morning, I want you to drive down and come and get me, take me to him. So he came down to get me out, and they, of course, threw a fit. I even had one caseworker come in and said, will you stay if we'll let your husband be with you? And I was like, no, I need to go see Dr. Hatch. I still had a feeding tube. So they had to teach my husband how to give my medication through the feeding tube and everything, and set up home health. So by the time we left, we got to Dr. Hatch's office at 5 o'clock. And he came over to his office just for me. So Dr. Hatch has developed technology where it's like a virtual reality headset that you wear. He put me in the headset, then he talked with me. It was the first time since I had this stroke that somebody told me that I was going to get better. It was the first time that I truly felt that I had hope. My husband had got a hotel room next to his office, and he's in Orem, Utah. So we drove to Orem. I slept for a couple hours, which I hadn't for a long time. And when I woke up, the spasms were going on, and I was asking my husband, will you please text Dr. Hatch? There's something going on. By about 9 o'clock that morning, Dr. Hatch said it was a Saturday. So he said that he would meet me at he has an outpatient like rehab. So he said he would meet us there and put me on some oxygen. But by the time we got to his office, my breathing had changed so much that my husband called Dr. Hatch and said, she's having difficulty breathing and everything. He said, just go to the emergency room and I'll meet you there. So by the time we made it to the hospital, I was in what is called lock syndrome, where I can't move any part of my body. I can't speak. And the only thing I can do is blink my eyes. My husband put me in a wheelchair and wheeled me into the ER entrance. They stopped us at the door to check our temperature. At that point, they took me from my husband and told him he could not go back. They put me into a CAT scan, brought me back out, and then decided, well, maybe we should bring her husband back since she's not communicating. At that point, my husband came back and they started asking questions, and he's like, she's pregnant. She's had 2 previous strokes. They decided that they were going to lifeline me back. This was the Provo Hospital. They were going to lifeline me back to the University of Utah. It was there that my husband said that if my grandpa who had passed away, that I was really close to, he came to get me, that it was okay to go. This stroke was affecting my right vertebral artery. So it was affecting my left brainstem. So they did not know if I would be able to move or function at all, or if I would be left in that state. So they put me on the lifeline. And the entire time, I just prayed that I would die during that time. I can't explain the amount of peace and no fear, and just knowing that if I did go, that my family would be okay. During that time, my husband was with Dr. Hatch. Dr. Hatch gave him a blessing. In that blessing, Dr. Hatch was told to let him know that I was in the arms of her Heavenly Father, and it was up to me if I wanted to come back or not. They took me from the life flight to the ER, intubated me, and again, I woke up. They intubated me as the tube was going down my throat. I was fully aware of everything, felt everything. With my 7 kids, I chose to do them all natural. Some of the last couple, I learned the method of hypnobirthing. So during those surgeries, I used the hypnobirthing to get through it. So we got through that one, and I woke up and I did not have the double vision, and I regained movement on my left side. But they said that there was damage in my emotion center of my brainstem. After the third stroke, I had the OB come in to do the ultrasound of my baby. And it was at that point where they said, we're not 100% sure why you keep having these strokes. Then they proceeded to ask me what I felt about the option of aborting my baby, because they were not sure if it was because of the baby that I was having these strokes. I remember looking at the doctor, and all sorts of colorful words went through my mind. And I just looked at her and I said, no, I would rather die. She left it at that. And I went a couple days in the ICU, and then they put me in the step down from the ICU. In the step down, I had a series of doctors come in all at once. It was again then that they asked me if I had thought about aborting the baby. They had met as a neurology team, over 100 neurologists in the University of Utah. And this is what they felt was the best thing for me. During the third stroke, they had placed 3 stents on the right vertebral artery. And then through the second, they closed this off. So I only had the one artery with the 3 stents in it. After that, they proceeded to send me back to rehab. Dr. Hatch had sent me some videos of brain exercises he wanted me to do. He also recommended using a red laser. My husband purchased one, just sent me it with a box, and then he FaceTimed me how to use it. So I used the cold laser and I did the brain exercises while I was in the hospital. I did, after the third stroke, I did start sleeping. I would do physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. I had to have help with everything, showering. I had some really great nurses and great help in OT and PT while I was there. I progressed faster than they anticipated. I went into the hospital on May 6th to the emergency room and had my first stroke May 7th, early morning. My second stroke was early morning on the 9th. And then I had my third stroke a week later on the 16th. From that, I stayed in the hospital until June 3rd. The day after I got out of the hospital, I went and saw Dr. Hatch. Now you have to understand he has a 3 to 6 month waiting list. And because of the relationship being my husband's missionary buddy, he got me right in. What a blessing it was. We stayed with my sister-in-law in Harriman, Utah. And then we would go and do outpatient rehab with him every day. And I was with him for about 10 days. And then I was able to go home for the first time. I had really mixed emotions seeing my kids for the first time. I was excited to see him, but it was really hard to have him see me that way. My little boy was 2.5 at the time. He wanted to come sit by me, and I couldn't move my arm out of the way with my other arm because it had no movement fast enough. And so he just sat on my arm and I just cried. It didn't hurt or anything, but it was just so hard. At that point, I was using a cane with a gait belt and assistance. And I had an AFO, which is to support my ankle because my foot would turn. I would do my exercises every day. I had to do them 7 times a day, and they took me about 25 to 30 minutes. Now, brain exercises are very different than physical exercises. It's a lot of focusing your eyes and focusing and doing other movements while focusing and different things. So they weren't like strenuous exercises, but they were definitely very fatiguing to the brain. I did sleep a lot. Because of this, my husband closed down his practice as soon as I had the strokes and was able to be with me and when I needed him throughout the time I was in the hospital. And then he also felt like he needed to be home with the kids. And then with my rehab, I had to have him physically help me with some of the exercises. And he would spend his day working with me, helping the kids, taking care of the house. We had so much help from the neighborhood, friends, and family. I truly appreciate all those that did help. There was just small things that were happening. I have written in my journal that on June 27th, it was the first time that I could physically swing my arm around and give my little boy a hug with two hands. By that time, I was able to walk with a gait belt on with someone close by myself, without my cane. When I left the hospital, they gave me not a lot of hope to even ever walk again. On September 1st was back to school night, and I had a goal that I was going to walk the school for my kids to go meet the teachers. And I did. I walked holding my husband's hand because there were crowds, and I still was really reliant on someone else because I felt if someone bumped me in the crowd, I could fall. I continued to see Dr. Hatch every 2 months for probably the first year. October 19th, I switched my OB. I needed to find the right high-risk OB for me. He was wonderful. He explained all the risks, and he would always tell me, it's always up to you, so you decide. At that point, they really were questioning the idea of me being able to push the baby out because I only had the one artery and it had 3 stents in it. He told me I couldn't push it out, but they could use forceps and different things to get the baby out. But in my technique of hypnobirthing, I've always used breathing the baby out instead of pushing the baby out. I was like, we are always had the opportunity to try that. And he was more than willing to help me try. When he gave me that option of it's up to you and what you choose, it was then that I prayed and fasted about what I needed to do to get my baby here safe. And the answer was definitely a C-section. And by November 9th, I went to go to a visit and I was having complications with higher blood pressure than I normally have. I was having some headaches, blurred speech, and I'd almost fallen a couple times. And so my doctor told me I would like to see this baby born in the next couple hours, but the option that's always up to you. Wow. So he gave us time, and my husband and I prayed about it. We went back to him and said, okay, we're going to have this baby. So he got me ready for the C-section. Josephina, Rebecca Hammond, was born that day by C-section. She was only a day to be 36 weeks, so they felt pretty confident. But I tend to carry my babies 2 weeks over my due date. So when she was born, she was presenting more like a 34-week-old baby and spent 3 weeks in the hospital in the NICU. We are extremely grateful to get her home and meet the family because of COVID restrictions. No family could go into the NICU, but my husband and I, because of the C-section, and I had to have a spinal block, and it shut the communication off again to my foot. I was having problems with recovery again. I felt like I had stepped backwards about 7 steps, and I was frustrated, and having a new baby and didn't feel confident with holding her by myself and having to ask help. When we got home, I had help. My sister actually, she would come a couple of days a week and help me out. And I was truly grateful for that. So I have continued to progress. There are things that I can't do completely. I still need to hold on if I go down steps. But this summer, my husband's always loved to go hiking for his birthday. And so this summer we went hiking. I was slower and downhill was a little hard for me, but we accomplished 2 different hikes with the help of my husband, of course, with the kids. And so much of the things my kids have had to sacrifice of not doing because of my health conditions. And I truly appreciate them. I am just extremely grateful for all the Lord has done for me in helping me and the blessings that He has poured upon me. You know, when I had that conversation, when I asked if I could be done, for the Spirit to tell me that if another baby were to come, that He would provide for me. He has certainly provided. It was not the way that I saw it, but He has certainly provided in everything.
I love that. I was going to ask you, what do you think caused the strokes? Do you think it was COVID? Because I know that's can have clotting symptoms, right?
So I think that COVID had a big part in it. I think that from previous history, I think that I had a weakness in my neck. I got run over when I was 5 years old, and I truly think it affected it then. And then I've had just issues from that. But then the thing that escalated it was when I threw up with the pregnancy. There were so many times that I was throwing up and I felt like I was going to choke to death.
Interesting. Yeah, I was curious about that. So, question about when you said, the first time, like, I don't want to be here. Do you remember experiencing the other side at all?
I don't. I just remember the feelings of not wanting to be here.
Yeah. And you probably, whether we remembered or not, did experience the other side and brought that feeling back, like, oh, it's so heavy down here. It's so hard being here, which I would imagine was what was going on.
Yeah. Something I forgot to share was after I had the third stroke and was in the rehab, I had darkness and the life light over. I prayed and I felt so much peace. And then afterwards, there was so much darkness. I kept hearing the words, "He didn't want you. You're not worthy of him," over and over. That's why I sought counseling. That's why in my journey, I felt prompted to reach out to a friend after she shared her story of beating depression. She introduced me to Dr. Joe Dispenza's meditation courses, which led me to some energy healing and so many other healing aspects.
Well, I love throughout your whole journey, you have been so proactive in finding resources that will help you on your journey to heal. I think your stubborn nature, as you said, you're stubborn, really was a gift in all of this for you to just fight for healing and hope and all of those beautiful things. Because, anytime people have been through a really traumatic experience, that darkness does set in, whether it's a spiritual aspect or just even a mental aspect. Some parts of your brain were damaged, weren't functioning right. But that's such a real thing. And I love that you sought healing in a variety of ways. I think that's really powerful and important for people to recognize. that you don't just wait around for people to tell you what to do. You go search for it and find it.
Yeah. Through all this, my husband has been my biggest cheerleader.
So in all of this, what would you say the biggest lessons you've learned, the biggest takeaways? While this is such a hard experience, obviously you're reflecting on it as a miracle experience. So what are the things that you've learned that help you see it that way?
I've been thinking about this question. There's two things. After my first stroke and trying to grasp everything, I just kept hearing the Lord speak to me saying, trust me. The second thing is by trusting God. Horrible things are happening in everyone's life here. By trusting God, He can make any horrible thing wonderful. I mean, I can look at my little girl and see what a blessing and miracle she is, and how much joy she's brought into our family. And meeting Dr. Hatch and bringing his equipment to Eastern Idaho to help people is just been such a blessing and miracle in our lives. Not only that, I have to say that my husband and I, to see how much he loves me, and that so many things have been brought into my life that I feel would not be here if I wouldn't have suffered a stroke.
Yeah, that's amazing when you're able to see the beauty that's come out of the hard, the difficult. And has that helped you overcome the depression, the darkness, all of that?
I would have to say that. And doing Dr. Hatch's brain exercises has helped a lot in that reprogramming the brain to get through it. But I still, when I get overwhelmed, go to meditation or breath work. Or I have a saying I have to say over and over in my head, I am certain the Lord is going to give me all I want and all I need, and is going to fulfill all my dreams and even better. And I'm so excited to see how it all plays out. The Lord is providing.
I love
progressively getting better.
Well, I love your timeline because, like you said, they seem like small gains, but they're huge. Like those little gains, really show incredible progress and miraculous progress, fast progress.
I torment myself, and it's the idea of why am I not healing completely? But then I look at others that have experienced the same thing as me, and I question, why am I progressing so much faster? Of course, I want to heal all the way, and I'm not going to stop. Dr. Hatch said that he's going to work with me until I'm 100%.
I love that your husband, that was the name that came to him as the one that could help you. And it sounds like he was definitely a divine part of your healing, of your progression.
Well, and I find it ironic that the Lord put them together 20 years earlier.
And that they were so similar in their career path choices. And I love that God had orchestrated all of those relationships before.
Yes. I'm extremely grateful for everything that my husband has done for me. And this has been an opportunity that we have worked with Dr. Hatch and trained with him and have brought his equipment to Idaho so that my husband can bring it into his practice and help people here in Eastern Idaho with any type of brain injury.
So yeah, what are the type of brain injuries or even brain functions that it can help with?
So we're looking at things such as, the typical stroke patient has brain injury, head trauma, concussions. We're looking for any type of abnormal in the brain or brain imbalances, things that the brain is not working correctly, we're able to help with those things. ADHD, anxiety, depression, dementia, Alzheimer's, extreme pain, because pain is related to the sensors come from the brain. There's so many things that he can help with.
I love that. And what's the program called?
The program is called Cogneuro.
I love it. Well, I will look it up, and I wrote that down because I'm fascinated. I love anything with the brain, and I know that there's so much healing. You know, when you look at like the neuroplasticity of the brain, and that the brain can heal, the brain can change, and we're not just doomed. If we've been diagnosed with something that we struggle with, we can help facilitate growth in the brain. And so I love that he's bringing that here. I think that's awesome.
Yes, that is exactly what brain exercises do.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is a kind of a hidden miracle blessing that came about through your experience that maybe, you know, God helped orchestrate this opportunity to come to you guys through your stroke experience, that, you know, a hidden blessing in it.
Yes, I truly believe it. And I'm so grateful that we can bring this to Eastern Idaho, because I know there's so many people that struggle.
Yeah, I think that's neat.
So if you want to reach out to my husband in any way, his practice is called Next Level Health Center, and he is Dr. Justin Hammond. The number is 208-520-6010. My husband's website is nextlevelhealthcenter.com, NextLevelHealthCenter.com.
Awesome. Well, Becca, thank you so much. Anything else you want to share before we end?
I remember thinking, why does everything have to be so hard? I heard, well, are you ready to give it to me and trust me? I believe that's what this whole journey is about, is me letting go and trusting the Lord, truly trusting him. And I'm still trying to learn how to do this each and every day.
Well, amen. I think that that's a lesson that we all need, and we all need to practice that. Yes.
Well, thank you for letting me have this opportunity. I was in meditation and breath work when I came out. It was contact license. You're supposed to share your story.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. You can also find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And remember to notice and celebrate miracles everywhere, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen.